Caleb had lived alone on the ranch for 8 long years. In all that time, his days followed the same quiet rhythm. He woke before sunrise, fixed a simple breakfast, tended to the horses, repaired fences, checked the water troughs, and worked the land until the light faded. He liked peace. He liked silence. But sometimes when the wind blew across the empty fields, he felt the kind of loneliness that settled deep in a man's bones. He never complained. He didn't know how. Life had taught him to carry things quietly, but deep down he wondered if this was all his life would ever be: endless days. Empty nights, and no one waiting for him at the dinner table. His parents had passed years ago, and the nearest neighbor lived miles away. As much as he tried to ignore it, he knew something was missing. One day, a distant relative wrote him a letter. She explained she knew a woman who wanted a stable life, a home, and a partner, not for money or luxury, but for peace. Caleb didn't expect much. He had no idea what this woman would look like, how old she was, or what kind of life she carried. He only knew she wanted a marriage arrangement. He wasn't excited or nervous. He was simply willing to give the idea a chance. Maybe fate was giving him a second path. He sent a letter back with a simple message. If she wants to come, she will be welcome. Weeks passed. Caleb didn't think much of it. Life continued as normal. But then, one afternoon, as he was repairing a loose plank near the stable, he heard something unusual. The earth trembled just a little at first, then stronger. It wasn't an earthquake. It felt like footsteps, heavy ones. He stood upright slowly and wiped his hands on his pants. The horses inside the stable grew restless, stamping their hooves nervously. Dusty, the old wagon horse, lifted his head and stared toward the road with wide eyes. Caleb followed the direction of their gaze. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but then he saw her, a huge figure walking down the dirt path. She was taller than any human he had seen, taller than any person he had ever imagined. Her head nearly reached the height of a small tree. Her steps shook the ground lightly as she approached. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't frightening. She was simply giant. Her long dress, sewn with extra fabric, moved softly in the wind. Her hair, thick and braided, hung over one shoulder like a rope. And her face, though nervous, was delicate, gentle, and full of uncertainty. Caleb realized she was the bride they had written about. The giant bride, as some whispered in the letter, though he never believed it. But now he understood. This woman wasn't just tall. She was truly enormous in size. She stopped a few feet away from him, her shadow stretching across the ground. She looked down at him with wide, worried eyes. Caleb had to tilt his head far back just to meet her gaze. She seemed afraid he might run away. "Hello," she said softly, her voice deep yet warm. Are you Caleb?" Her voice didn't thunder the way he expected. It was gentle, a little shaky, almost unsure of itself. "Yes," Caleb answered, forcing himself not to stare too long at her massive height. "I'm Caleb, and you must be Alara." She nodded quickly, her nervousness obvious even from above. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said in a rush. "The cart driver left me halfway because he was frightened. I had to walk the last few miles." Caleb felt a twist in his chest. People had treated her poorly before she even reached him. He cleared his throat. "You didn't need to apologize." Alara lowered her huge hands, folding them together as if trying to make herself smaller, even though she couldn't. Caleb suddenly realized how much courage it must have taken for her to come here. She looked strong, but her eyes told a story of years of being judged, misunderstood, and pushed aside. He motioned toward the cabin. "You must be tired." The walk was long. Alara nodded, but she hesitated before taking a step, afraid she might break something or scare him. When she finally followed him toward the cabin, the wooden porch creaked softly under her weight, but it held. She stood outside, her head nearly touching the roof. "I'm too big to enter," she said quietly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Caleb didn't panic. He didn't make her feel awkward. "We'll fix that," he said calmly. "I'll build a taller door frame. You can stand or sit by the porch for now." Her eyes widened a little. She hadn't expected kindness. She slowly sank to her knees outside the doorway. Even kneeling, she was nearly level with the top of the doorway. But at least now they could speak face to face without straining. "I know I look strange," she whispered, "but I promise I work hard, and I can help with everything." "I didn't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Caleb replied simply. She looked away as if she didn't believe him. Caleb made her a meal. She tried to eat delicately, picking up the food between her enormous fingers. She apologized each time something trembled or creaked. Caleb simply talked to her calmly, asking about her journey, her family, her hopes. Slowly, she relaxed. That night, Caleb prepared to sleeping spaces 1. Inside for himself, in a bed of thick blankets and hay stacked comfortably under the porch roof for her. She thanked him softly and settled in for the night. But as the moon rose, Caleb heard her breathing, uneven, shaky. He stepped outside. "Ilara, are you all right?" She hesitated before speaking. Her voice was trembling, barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something." Caleb stepped closer. "Go on," she swallowed hard. Even that small motion looked enormous on someone her size. "I know we are married now. I know what is expected on the first night." Her large hands clenched nervously. "So, can we please make it quick?" Caleb felt his whole body stiffen, not from fear, but from shock. He stared up at her, realizing she wasn't asking because she was eager. She was asking because she was scared. She looked down, her voice shaking. "People always say, someone like me shouldn't be seen slowly, that it's better to get things over with, so you don't feel uncomfortable, so it doesn't feel strange." Her voice cracked painfully. "I just don't want to disappoint you." Caleb froze. Every part of him went still. He wasn't angry, he was heartbroken. He saw the truth now. Behind the size, behind the power, behind the physical strength, she was a woman who had been judged so harshly that she believed she didn't deserve gentleness. Caleb breathed slowly, choosing his words with care. "Ilara, nothing has to happen tonight." She looked confused. "But we are married," yes, Caleb said, "and marriage isn't something you rush because you feel scared." Ilara blinked, stunned. You're not upset?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm not upset. I'm sorry you thought you had to say that." Her shoulders slumped in relief. She hadn't expected kindness. She hadn't expected patience. Caleb continued. "You don't need to rush anything with me. You don't need to pretend. We'll take everything slow. I want you to feel safe here, Ilara. Truly safe." Her huge eyes glistened slightly. "No one has ever said that to me." Caleb gave a small, warm smile. "Then it's time someone did." Ilara lowered herself into her blankets again, her movements softer, calmer than before. For the first time, she felt a little hope. She wrapped the blanket around herself and whispered, "Thank you." Caleb nodded and stepped back inside the cabin. That night, they didn't sleep in the same space. They didn't rush anything. They didn't force anything. But something important happened. Trust began. And in that quiet night, with the moonlight resting gently across her enormous form, the giant bride finally felt like she might belong somewhere. And the lonely cowboy realized his life was about to change in ways he never imagined. Caleb did not move at first. When Ilara whispered those shaky words the night before, asking him to make it quick, every part of him had locked in place. It was not fear that froze him. It was the sudden realization that she did not trust the moment, did not trust herself, and did not trust what this new marriage meant. Instead of seeing him as a partner, she saw herself as a burden who had to rush through everything because that was what people expected of her. All night he lay awake thinking about it. The moonlight had slipped through the cabin window, resting across the wooden floor, and he had listened to her soft, uneven breathing on the other side of the room. She had turned her back toward him, holding herself small even though her tall frame could never be truly hidden. He could tell she had cried a little. The emotional weight in the air was too real for him to ignore. When morning finally came, Caleb stepped outside before sunrise, letting the cold breeze clear his head. The ranch was quiet. The horses were still resting, and the air smelled of earth, pine, and distant rain. He had been alone for so many years. He knew the comfort of silence, the peace of simple routines. But Alara, she had lived a different kind of silence. Hers was the silence of someone who had been judged, misunderstood, and pushed aside. He made a decision long before she stepped out of the cabin, when she finally appeared. Her hair tied loosely, eyes looking anywhere but at him. Caleb spoke first. "Alara," he said softly, "you don't need to rush anything. Not with me. Not ever." She looked confused, like she wasn't sure if she heard him correctly. I didn't mean to upset you," she whispered, folding her hands together. "I just didn't want to be a problem. People always think I'm too much. Too big, too strong, too slow, too clumsy. So I thought maybe if everything is quick, it won't be hard for you." Her voice had no anger, only fear of disappointing him. Caleb shook his head. "You're not a problem, and we're not doing anything quick. We'll take things slow as you need." Alara stared at him for a long moment, her expression almost blank from shock. She had never heard such words before. No man had ever offered her patience. Most people assumed she could handle everything just because she was tall and strong. People forgot she had feelings too, fears too, dreams too. She felt something shift inside her, something warm and unfamiliar trust. Caleb did something else no one expected. He calmly took his blanket and arranged it on the spare bed across the room. "We'll sleep separately until you feel comfortable," he said. Alara felt her chest tighten, but this time in a good way. The gesture was simple, but to her it felt like a heavy stone being lifted from her heart. She nodded quietly, grateful beyond words. Over the next few days, Caleb made sure she never felt pressured. He treated her gently, not because he thought she was weak, but because he respected her past. On the ranch, he taught her work step by step, showing her how to guide the horses, how to mend a fence, how to check water troughs. He never raised his voice, never made her feel slow, and never reminded her of mistakes. Alara tried her best. She lifted heavy wooden beams with ease, surprising Caleb with her natural strength. She learned quickly, sometimes even faster than he expected. But more than her skills, what impressed him most was how much she wanted to do things right. One afternoon, while repairing a broken section of the fence, Caleb noticed her hands trembling. She had done a good job, yet she kept asking, "Is this enough? Should I redo it? Maybe I messed it up." He gently placed his hand near hers, not touching her, just close enough to make her look up. "Alara," he said softly, "you did it right the first time." Her breathing steadied. She turned her face away slightly, embarrassed. But he could see the small smile she tried to hide. In the evenings, they cooked together, though she was clumsy with pots and pans. More than once, she bumped her head on the low cabinet doors or accidentally dropped a spoon, because her hands were too big for the small kitchen tools. Each time she apologized, Caleb simply shook his head and told her it was fine. One evening, while cutting vegetables, she finally asked, "Why are you so calm about everything?" Most people get annoyed. Caleb looked at her with a simple honesty. "Maybe they don't see what I see." She lifted her eyes, puzzled. "I see someone trying," he said. "Someone who cares. Someone who feels things deeply but hasn't been given the chance to show it." Alara blinked a few times. Almost dizzy from hearing words she had never received before, they walked into town together a few days later to buy supplies. The townsfolk stared, as they always did. Some whispered, some pointed, some made assumptions, their faces full of quiet judgment. Alara kept her shoulders tense, ready for the usual comments. But something unexpected happened. This time, Caleb stayed close to her not out of fear or embarrassment, but to show everyone she was with him, and he was proud of it. When someone tried making a rude joke under their breath, Caleb stepped forward, calmly but firmly shutting the gossip down. Alara watched him with a strange warmth swirling inside her. No one had stood up for her before, not like this, not with steady confidence and no anger. She realized he wasn't protecting her because he saw her as fragile. He protected her because he cared. Back at the ranch, they sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. The sky was painted orange and gold. Alara gently rocked in the chair, her hands folded in her lap. She turned to Caleb and asked, Why did you stop that man from speaking badly about me? You didn't have to. Caleb turned his head, studying her quietly. I did it because I don't like anyone talking wrong about my wife. The word wife made her heart skip. She had heard that word before, but always with hesitation or hidden disappointment from others. But when Caleb said it, it sounded sincere, like a promise, not a burden. Ilara felt her throat tighten. She wanted to say something, anything, but her voice wouldn't rise. In the following days, their routines grew smoother. Their conversation grew easier. They shared small stories, Caleb talking about his years alone on the ranch, and Ilara sharing bits of her harsh past, though she kept most of it hidden. He could tell there was a lot of pain behind her eyes, things she had never spoken fully about. One evening, while they prepared dinner, Ilara paused. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and courage. I just want you to know, she said, her voice soft. I'm trying to be a good wife. I know I'm different from other women. I know I don't look right to most people. I don't want to make your life hard. Caleb set down the pot he was holding and faced her fully. You're not making my life hard, he said. You're making it different. But different isn't bad. Ilara swallowed hard. She could almost feel her past breaking away piece by piece. Before going to sleep that night, she stood quietly by his bed, the one across the room, and whispered, "Thank you for not rushing, for being patient with me." Caleb gave her a small smile. We've got time, Ilara. We're building something real. That doesn't happen fast. She nodded, stepping back toward her own bed. But her heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time in her life, she believed a slow beginning could lead to something good. And for the first time in his life, Caleb realized that patience was not a burden. It was a gift he was grateful to give. They both drifted to sleep with calm minds, knowing their story was only beginning, and that trust, true trust, was finally starting to bloom. Ilara woke before sunrise the next morning, but unlike the days before, she did not feel the heavy pressure in her chest. The fear that usually settled over her heart like a dark cloud felt weaker. She still had worries, still had doubts, but Caleb's gentle patience was slowly changing something inside her. She sat quietly on the edge of her bed, watching the faint light enter the room. Her hands were clasped tightly, and she breathed slowly. Preparing herself for the day, Caleb stirred from his own bed a few minutes later. When he sat up, he noticed the quiet look on her face. Not sadness, not fear, something else. Uncertainty mixed with courage. You're awake early, he said softly. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I couldn't sleep much. I was thinking. Caleb didn't push her, didn't demand an explanation. He simply stood up, stretched his arms, and offered a small smile. Breakfast first. Talking later if you want. Ilara liked that about him. He never forced her to speak. He let her choose. And because of that, she found herself wanting to share more. They made breakfast together. Again, Caleb chopping vegetables while Ilara stirred the pot. Once or twice, she bumped her elbow on the counter or dropped a wooden spoon. And each time she winced as if expecting him to be annoyed. But Caleb simply picked it up or adjusted his place at the counter and continued. His calmness eased her nerves little by little. After breakfast, they walked to the stable to tend to the horses. The animals had slowly warmed to Ilara. At first, the horses were startled by her tall figure and heavy steps. But after a few days of gentle feeding and soft words, they accepted her. One horse, a brown mare named Willow, seemed especially drawn to her. Ilara brushed Willow's coat gently, humming a soft tune while Caleb watched from the other end of the stable. He admired her without her knowing. She looked strong, yet peaceful, like a mountain that could withstand storms but still offer shelter. He didn't say anything, though. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. When the chores were finished, Ilara finally turned to him with a serious expression. Caleb, she said, her voice low, I need to tell you something. Something important. Caleb nodded. All right. Let's sit. He sat near the small corral under the shade of an old tree. The wind carried the sound of rustling leaves, and a soft breeze brushed against their faces. Ilara kept her hands folded tightly. She didn't look at him at first. Her eyes stayed on the ground, as if she were afraid to watch his reaction. "I need you to know why I said what I said that night," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Why I asked you to. Make things quick." Caleb stayed silent, letting her breathe and take her time. She inhaled deeply, then finally raised her eyes to meet his. "It wasn't because of you," she said. "It was because of what happened before." Caleb's brows lowered slightly with concern, but he didn't interrupt. She continued in a quiet, shaky voice. "I was supposed to marry once before. It was another arranged match years ago. My family thought it was best. They believed someone strong like me shouldn't be alone. But when the man came to see me, she swallowed hard. He didn't like me. He said I looked wrong. He said my size made him uncomfortable. And then he spoke about me like I was some creature, not a woman." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly, but he stayed calm for her sake. "I tried to be kind," Ilara went on. "I tried to be helpful. But he said awful things loud enough for my family to hear. He said he would never accept someone like me. He left the same day." A long silence followed her words. Ilara lowered her head. "After that, I started to believe maybe it was true. Maybe I wasn't meant to be accepted or treated gently. So when I came here, when we married, I thought if things were quick, maybe you wouldn't feel the same disappointment he did." Caleb exhaled slowly, not from frustration, but from the weight of her pain. "Ilara," he said softly, "I'm sorry you went through that." She blinked back a few tears and looked away. "I know you're patient. I know you're kind. But part of me still remembers those words. They sit in my mind like stones I can't remove." Caleb shifted closer, not touching her, just offering presence. "But you told me now," he said. "That means something. It means you trust me more than before." Ilara looked at him carefully. "I wanted to trust someone for a long time, but I didn't know how." Caleb smiled gently. "We'll learn together." She let out a shaky breath that carried years of loneliness. From that moment, something changed between them, not instantly, not dramatically, but clearly. The quiet wall Ilara had built around herself began to show cracks. She walked a little closer to Caleb during chores. She spoke more during meals. She even laughed softly once when Caleb slipped in the mud while carrying a bucket of water. Though she covered her mouth immediately out of embarrassment, Caleb laughed too, assuring her it was fine. Their connection grew naturally. Caleb also changed small things in their daily life to help her feel more comfortable. He stopped rushing through tasks. He explained things slowly. He asked her what she preferred instead of assuming. And he always checked her expression to make sure she was at ease. One day, after they had finished repairing the barn roof, Ilara stood beside him and said quietly, "Thank you for being patient with me." Caleb shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I'm not being patient, I'm being honest. This is how I want things to be." Ilara looked down, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "No one has ever treated me gently before," she admitted. "It feels new, strange, but good." Caleb smiled. "Then we're doing something right." On another afternoon, while they were gathering firewood, Ilara suddenly stopped and turned to him. She seemed nervous, but determined. "Caleb, I don't want to feel afraid anymore," she said. "Not with you?" He lifted his head, meeting her eyes fully. "And you won't be," he said. "Not in this home. Not with me." Her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time, she stood not as someone expecting judgment, but as someone finally believing she was safe. The biggest change came one evening near sunset. They were sitting on the porch again, watching the sky shift into warm colors. Ilara's hands rested in her lap. She didn't fidget this time. She breathed calmly. "Caleb," she said in a soft voice, "I don't want things to be quick anymore." Caleb turned toward her slowly, giving her time. She continued, "I want things to be right. I want them to feel honest. I want to move forward at a pace that makes sense. Not out of fear, but out of trust." Caleb felt something warm rise in his chest. He nodded with deep understanding. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." Ilara closed her eyes briefly, letting relief wash over her. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't loud. But it was powerful, more powerful than anything that had happened so far, because it marked the moment she chose trust over fear. From that day onward, the ranch felt different. The work felt lighter, the evenings felt warmer, and the silence between them felt safe rather than tense. Ilara slowly began to believe that her past no longer controlled her. Caleb showed her that she had value in it because of how she looked or how strong she was, but because of who she was inside. She had been told all her life that she was too much. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was enough. Ilara woke with a new feeling in her heart the next morning, a feeling that didn't weigh her down. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't worry. It was something calmer, almost gentle. For the first time in a long while, she didn't dread the day ahead. She stretched her arms, took a slow breath, and watched the early sunlight touch the wooden floor of the cabin. Caleb was already awake, tending to the fire. Carefully adding new logs and warming the room, he turned his head when he heard her sit up. "Morning," he said in a soft voice that held an unspoken kindness. Ilara nodded. "Morning." There was no tension between them now, no awkwardness. The silence was peaceful instead of heavy. She stood up, brushed her hair away from her face, and walked to the kitchen area to help him. Together, they prepared breakfast. Their movements were still unsure, sometimes two people learning each other's rhythms, but they worked well. When Ilara dropped a jar by accident and quickly apologized, Caleb simply smiled and handed her another one. After breakfast, they stepped outside. The air was crisp, and the sky was painted in colors of soft orange and pink. The ranch looked calm, as if it too understood the change happening between them. Caleb saddled the old wagon horse. Dusty and Ilara stood beside him, handing him the straps when he needed them. They worked without rushing, without forcing conversation. Yet both of them felt something new - comfort. Later in the day, Caleb suggested checking the northern fence line. It had been in bad shape a month ago, and he wanted to make sure no cattle wandered too far. Ilara nodded and joined him. They walked along the wooden posts, testing each one. When she pushed a beam back into place with her strong hands, Caleb admired how steady she was. "You're getting good at this?" he said. Ilara looked at him with surprise. She wasn't used to praise. "You really think so?" "I know so," he answered. A small, shy smile appeared on her lips, one Caleb noticed and quietly treasured. As they walked, Ilara spoke with more ease. She pointed at the distant hills and said she'd like to explore them someday. Caleb told her about a hidden stream up there where the water was clear enough to see stones at the bottom. Ilara listened with interest, asking questions about the land, the seasons, and the animals. She wasn't afraid to speak anymore. She wasn't afraid of being judged. Around midday, they sat under a tall pine tree and shared a simple lunch bread, dried fruit, and cool water from a tin bottle. Ilara looked at Caleb as he leaned back against the tree trunk, squinting slightly at the bright sky. He looked peaceful, strong in his own quiet way. She felt something warm inside her chest, something she had been afraid to acknowledge earlier. "Caleb," she said, her voice soft. He looked at her right away, attentive as always. "Yes, I'm glad I came here," he smiled gently. "I'm glad you're here." Her heart tightened, but this time not in fear. It was a good tightness, one that came from hearing words she had longed for. She lowered her eyes, but the smile on her face stayed. They finished their meal and continued checking the fence. When they reached the final corner of the property, Ilara noticed the land stretching endlessly before them. It looked open, warm, inviting. Not like the lands she grew up in, places where she always felt out of place. It's too big, too different, too noticed and yet never truly seen. Caleb wiped the sweat off his brow and glanced at her. "This place is yours too now," he said casually, as though the sentence was light. But to Ilara, it was like a weight lifting from her shoulders. "My place?" she whispered. "Our place," Caleb corrected softly. Her eyes widened slightly. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever given her something that felt so alive and permanent. They walked back together, slow and steady, side by side. The sun hung high in the sky, leaving warm patches of light on the dirt road. When they reached the cabin, Alara stopped at the porch steps. She looked up at the small home they had been building together, not with tools, but with patience, understanding, and gentleness. "Caleb," she said again. More firmly this time, he stood beside her, waiting. "There's something else I want to say."
Yes.
He didn't rush her. He waited, letting her choose her moment. She looked straight ahead, as if gathering her courage, and then slowly turned to him. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Caleb's expression softened. "I'm glad." "I don't want to sleep apart forever," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Not because I feel pressured, but because I trust you now." Caleb swallowed, not from discomfort, but from emotion. He nodded quietly. "Whenever you're ready." "There's no hurry." Alara nodded too. "Not today, but soon." Caleb respected that. He didn't push, didn't question. His silence was understanding, not avoidance. Alara felt grateful for that. For a man who didn't treat her like a duty or an obligation, but like a human being whose feelings mattered. In the days that followed, their routine grew even steadier. They laughed more. They talked more. They ate meals as if sharing stories was as natural as breathing. Sometimes Alara walked close enough for their shoulders to brush, and instead of pulling away, she let the small touches stay. One evening, a storm rolled in. Heavy clouds gathered above the ranch and loud thunder cracked through the sky. Alara had always disliked storms because they reminded her of nights when she felt small inside, even though she was large in size. Caleb noticed the unease in her expression. "You all right?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "Storms. They make me remember things." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then stay close. Storms don't last." She stayed beside him while the rain hit the roof and lightning flashed behind the mountains. When thunder shook the cabin walls, she gripped her hands tightly, trying not to show fear. Caleb didn't say much. He simply sat nearby, present and steady. At one point she whispered, "It's strange how safe it feels now." Caleb looked at her and said, "Safe is how it should always be." The storm passed later that night, and the quiet afterward felt warm and comforting. Alara slept peacefully, knowing she had someone by her side who understood her better each day. Weeks went by, and their bond grew stronger. Townspeople noticed the change too. When they visited the market, Alara walked with her head higher. Caleb talked proudly about how much she helped on the ranch. Some people still whispered, but they whispered with curiosity, not cruelty. Others admired their partnership, noticing how well they balanced each other. One afternoon, Alara stood at the porch, watching the sunset. Caleb joined her, standing close enough for their elbows to touch. She looked at him, her eyes soft. "Caleb," she said, "I don't think I'm the same person I was when I arrived." He looked at her carefully. "You're stronger now." She shook her head slowly. "No, I think I was always strong. I just never believed it." Caleb nodded. "Then I'm glad you see it now." They watched the sky together as colors shifted from gold to deep purple. Alara took a slow breath and spoke the words she had been holding inside for days. "I want to build a real life with you," she said. "Not just a house, not just a routine, but something true." Caleb's voice was gentle when he answered. "We already started." Lara felt her heart swell. She looked at him fully and saw not just a cowboy or a partner, but a man who had given her patience when others gave her judgment, respect when others gave her fear, and kindness when others gave her shadows. "I'm grateful for you," she said quietly. "And I'm grateful for you," he replied. They stood together on the porch, the warm evening air surrounding them, their silhouettes outlined against the fading light. In that moment, Alara realized something important, something she never believed, though she was no longer alone. Not in her heart. Not in her home. Not in her life. The cowboy who once froze in surprise had done the unthinkable, not by rushing her, not by forcing anything, but by choosing kindness where others expected impatience, by choosing understanding where others expected judgment. By choosing her, their story did not end with loud celebrations or dramatic events. It ended quietly, beautifully, and honestly with two people standing side by side, knowing that everything ahead of them would be faced together, and sometimes That is the strongest kind of ending a story can have.